Okay. Basically, what we are doing in recent days is that having considered the influence of in the smaller epic scale, like 12 millimeter and so on, we had, as you know, in other episodes, we've shown and discussed the 10 millimeter Civil War, American Civil War that we've produced. This, of course, has resulted in our reviewing, trying to understand the viability of larger scales now. But so we have concluded that the 172 enormous collections that we have, over the last 35 or more years, we've collected these figures and so on. There's no reason to get rid of them because they will be used for skirmish level. Now, on one hand, skirmish level would mean that you would have only company-sized figures, I should say, a small amount of figures on the game table. And every hex would represent, I don't know, maybe 20 yards or 25 yards or something like that. Whereas in the normal Wargaming 172 scale regimental, one unit was a regiment. And when you had skirmishers on the game table, they performed the function of skirmishing. So that's one thing. But the skirmish level, so-called, for horse and musket, would involve, again, 4 stands per company of infantry. And that's what you would see. You would only see companies of infantry, and every gun that's represented would represent one actual gun. What this does is it opens up the possibility of doing empire battles. India, Southeast Asia, Africa, all these other kinds of things where French and imperialism was, expanding. So those are the kinds in Afghanistan and so on, and everything else. So those opens up those utilizing the figures for that opens up a great deal of stuff we can get back into. We started doing empire stuff, and then just other things moved into priority. So what we're looking at here now is the American Civil War 172 scale. We got some regiments out there. Each one has a battery of artillery, and we've decided that we need to experiment more with skirmishing. It's not skirmish level, but skirmishing and skirmishers. And to that effect, we have gone back to print some of our movement trays. And this is one example right here. So you can see that these are, of course, not painted yet. But the intention here is for it to make it easy to move these skirmishers around. And you might say, well, okay, how do you adjudicate? What are the regulations for using skirmishers? Well, basically, skirmishers, the first thing to remember is you can't have more than 1 per or 2 per hex. It's just because that's close. So your movement tray just makes it easy for you to move them around the game table until they get to where they want to be. So then you can have 1 per hex, absolutely, but you can't have more than 2 squads per hex. If that's the case, then if there's more than 2, they have to be pushed out in the owner's desire, but they can't exist in there. It's just too close. So what does that mean? Well, you can see that a skirmish line up here has a frontage like this. If it was smaller and 2 men or 2 stands per hex, the frontage is smaller. Does that have any combat benefit? I don't think so. I think the men are the men, right? The rifles are the rifles. It's just a question of how much frontage you want. We got some glue stringing on, hangers on here. Okay. And so on and so forth. So that's how that works. You can see they go right back on the movement tray. It doesn't matter how they're facing. Skirmishers fire in any direction, and they only ever cause incremental hits. They can't cause anything serious, just incremental. Yes, they have a firing routine, just like every other thing in the game. They can miss or at least not get an effective hit. But the fact of the matter is, they just cause incremental hits. Do they have the same range as a fully formed regiment of infantry? Yeah, they do. And if they are armed with repeaters and other sophisticated cavalry carbines or infantry weapons, for instance, then yes, they would get an additional die damage. Or I'm sorry, they would get an additional incremental hit. So they would be potentially damaging, and they are and were reported to be when they had those kinds of weapons. So that's what we're talking about, and we'll introduce them. We'll give the Confederates some as well, and the Union's going to start with maybe one. I guess we can call this a company of skirmishers. There's four. Well, actually, that's a good question. How are we going to state that that's not a whole regiment? I suppose it would be this. You could say it's one company per stand. I suppose that's four companies. That could be a regiment. We just don't want to have to put the signifier out there for what regiment it is. Whole regiments as skirmishers were common, but if we were to do that, we would have to have a flag and so on and so forth. So I don't know if we want to go that far. We might. We certainly have plenty of flags. So, but right now the intention is that is from a regiment. So whichever regiment it belongs to, we can signify it somehow. It doesn't matter, but maybe with a dot, colored self-adhesive dot that we have. So if this guy sends out skirmishers, we put a dot on him and put a dot on the skirmish group, so that we know that those skirmishers belong to him. And is that necessary? I don't know if it's really necessary to show that these guys belong to a unit, because they're being pushed back or being damaged is not going to reflect at all on the main unit that they come from. It's just unto themselves. So that's what we're working on, and I think we'll demonstrate that as we move forward too. So there we are.